Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in, well, just a catastrophic story where a really deep personal crisis just slams right into corporate malfeasance.
It's quite the collision.
Yeah, and we're not just tracking a murder here. We're really looking at that exact moment a woman's life completely splintered, and it forced her to become, both an investigator and, in a way, a criminal just to stay afloat.
That's really the core tension, isn't it?
Yeah.
Our subject is a woman named Lake Warren, and she starts this whole journey just trying to manage a painful, almost, standard issue New York City divorce,
Right.
a custody battle. And then within maybe 48 hours, she finds herself literally scrambling out of a dead man's loft. And from there, she's plunging headfirst into this deep dive on systemic fraud at a really high-end medical facility.
It's the ultimate shortcut to being well-informed about danger, I guess. This deep dive, I think, is going to explore just how quickly a life that looks routine, successful on the surface, can completely dissolve when all that paranoia you're warned about suddenly becomes a terrifying, tangible reality.
So our mission today is to unpack Lake's timeline with almost surgical precision. We need to track her progression from a moment of, let's call it, reckless desire, the hookup with Dr. Mark Keaton, all the way through this maze of threats designed to psychologically break her.
And all the way to the end?
All the way to the end, to the moment she's successfully exposed to systemic crime embryo theft. And crucially, we have to analyze the high-stakes fabrication, the story she engineers at the end to save herself.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start exactly where she was, at her personal and professional precipice. I mean, let's talk about the immense pressure cooker she was already in before a murder even took place.
So when we first meet Lake Warren, she's in this deeply vulnerable, but also, potentially hopeful phase. The sources describe her as finally coming out of 4 months of just intense grief and guilt after her separation from her husband, Jack.
So she's just starting to feel a little bit of daylight.
Exactly. She'd achieved a degree of lightness, a feeling of being, less oppressed by a relationship that had clearly been stifling her for a long time.
And that tentative piece is, well, it's violently shattered. The core conflict, and really the reason she was so psychologically primed for panic, was this sudden, really vicious custody challenge launched by Jack. He's not just an ex-husband. The sources are very clear. They frame him as vindictive.
Absolutely. And he's seeking full custody of their 2 children, Amy, who's 11, and Will, who's 9. For Lake, the stakes are completely existential. She had 4 months of recovery, and now she's hit with this legal blitzkrieg. It suggests Jack is trying to, completely erase her from their shared life.
And the second she gets those papers, her lawyer, a guy named Hotchkiss, he just shifts the whole conversation from, negotiation to pure survival. Hotchkiss issued what the sources call extreme warnings, and these really set the stage for everything that follows.
Yeah, the lawyer's instructions are basically a roadmap for life under surveillance. Lake's mandate was threefold. First, make her life look utterly routine and stable.
Check.
Second, make sure the children were visibly and at all times her absolute priority. And third, and this is the big one, anticipate as a certainty that you are being followed by a private investigator that Jack has probably hired.
The sources even quote Hotchkiss telling her not to rob a bank.
Right, which just underscores the gravity of it. Any misstep, any tiny deviation from pristine, perfect behavior would be weaponized against her in court.
That's just critical context, isn't it? She is living under a legal microscope. And we should probably consider Jack's motivation, too. Lake suspects this is driven by more than just, parental concern.
Of course.
She believes Jack is involved with someone new, that he's aiming for a sleeker life, and that he's trying to deny her half of their assets, including the equity from a software business she helped him start.
It creates this powerful sense of injustice and betrayal before the main crime even occurs. She feels like she poured her emotional and financial capital into his success, and now he's using those same resources to hire PIs and lawyers to destroy her reputation and steal her children.
And all that emotional fury, that deep sense of being wronged, it just makes her desperately seek some kind of validation, a return to feeling attractive, desire.
And that desperation, that vacuum of validation, is perfectly filled by the arrival of Dr. Mark Keaton.
Right. So Lake is working as a marketing consultant for the Advanced Fertility Center, a job that requires her to be a professional, discreet, really polished.
And Keaton is the absolute antithesis of the staid, established doctor she usually works with. He's a consultant flown in from LA, and he's immediately described as an absolute knockout.
The sources really emphasizes undoctory looks, spiked hair, slate blue eyes, and Lake, she recognizes the danger. She immediately clocks him as a real player.
Yeah, but after a year of emotional detachment, the attraction is just overwhelming. It's a sudden, irrational rush of desire. She is completely aware of Hotchkiss's warnings, but she agrees to go to a work dinner at Balthazar, a high-end place, with Keaton and a bunch of clinic colleagues.
Dr. Sherman, Levin, Haas, and Perkins. This is her first major act of deliberate, really high-stakes rebellion against her lawyer's advice.
And the dinner itself is just excruciatingly high stakes for her. She's seated far away, she's watching him, she's anticipating. The sources call it eye sex that they exchange across the table.
So the professional boundary just completely dissolves in that moment.
Completely. She's actively inviting risk into her life.
Then comes the invitation. Keaton tells her he's decided not to join the clinic after all, which in itself should have been a huge institutional red flag, right?
A massive one. A highly sought-after consultant suddenly pulling out. But instead of questioning the professional angle, Lake focuses entirely on the personal. Keaton suggests a drink at his Soho loft at 78 Crosby.
And Lake agrees. The reasoning she gives herself, I deserve a night like this, is just the classic justification for self-sabotage when you're under extreme stress.
It is. She is consciously overriding that voice of reason, choosing this fleeting moment of validation over her long-term legal security.
Okay, this is where we really need to slow down, because the setting here, the loft, it provides the roadmap to the entire conspiracy, even though Lake has no idea at the time.
No idea. Keaton's loft is stunning, as described. Double-height ceilings, a mezzanine, and critically, that large terrace.
While Keaton is making drinks, Lake, driven by what they call a consultant's curiosity, or maybe just a woman's desire to gauge the competition, she surveys a side table.
And what she sees provides immediate confirmation of his character, but also, unknowingly, it links him directly to the clinic's hidden operations.
This is the key synthesis point right here. The table had three crucial items: an ATM slip, which suggests, easy cash flow or maybe recent financial activity.
Potentially gambling debt, as it's hinted at later.
Right. Then a business card for an event planner, Ashley Triffin, which just confirms the player status. And then the most crucial piece of physical evidence, a scrap of paper with the name Melanie Turnbull scrawled on it.
And Lake just files that name away as another potential conquest. She thinks he's a player and dismisses any professional implication. She just chooses to lean into the immediate physical attraction.
The hookup is intense, a necessary release from all the pressure of her failing marriage and the restrictive new life she's been forced into.
They eventually drift off. Lake wakes up around 3 a.m. needing the bathroom, which is ultimately what saves her life. It saves her from being found right next to a corpse.
She goes back to the bedroom, and the entire atmosphere just shifts.
The transition from this, tranquil city night on the terrace to immediate horror is just brutal. Keaton is dead in his bed, the sheet is kicked down, he's sprawled on his back, and what's truly visceral is her initial misinterpretation.
Right, she sees a big and dark presence next to him.
And in her groggy state, she thinks it's a dog.
The slow, terrifying realization that the dog is just the residual form of the killer who just vanished, and that the man she just slept with is now a homicide victim, it just throws her right back into that hyper-alert, paranoid state that Hotchkiss warned her about.
And the second Lake registers the situation, those legal warnings from Hotchkiss just override every other instinct. This is really the defining moment of the whole story.
The decision is immediate, and for her custody case, it's strategically necessary. Calling 911 is impossible.
No way.
If the police found her, a woman going through this high-profile, contested divorce next to a murdered high-profile doctor she just had sex with, the headlines would absolutely ruin her. Jack would win custody in a heartbeat.
The irony is so profound. Hotchkiss told her not to rob a bank. Lake hasn't robbed a bank, but being found at a murder scene is, well, it's arguably worse. Her immediate priority becomes a clean, untraceable escape.
And we see the frantic, disoriented nature of her panic. She makes these basic mistakes, like calling 411 directory assistance in her crazed state instead of 911.
Her focus is purely on removing any evidence connecting her to that scene. She violently shoves her sundress, which now contains biological evidence, into her purse.
Her escape logistics, though, they demonstrate a really clear understanding of the risks of modern surveillance. She rules out a cab instantly.
Right, fearing subpoenaed cab company records that would link her directly to the Soho address. She rules out the subway. Her only option is extreme physical exertion, walking blocks and blocks, heading north from Soho, avoiding cameras, avoiding contact, until she finally dares to hail a cab at 23rd Street just before 6:30 in the morning.
Okay, let's pause there for a second. Based on the warnings from Hotchkiss, Lake's cover-up plan is, it's riddled with contradictions. She walks 20 blocks reeking of sex and fear to avoid a cab record, but then she decides to take her sundress and trench coat to the dry cleaners, just in case.
That's where the paranoia becomes operational instead of just reactive. She knows she can't just throw away her clothes. That would look suspicious in itself. Taking them to the dry cleaners is a form of evidence disposal by proxy. She's banking on the chemicals destroying forensic traces. It's a calculated risk for sure, but the 20-block walk was driven by immediate terror. The dry cleaning is a slightly calmer, more premeditated attempt to manage the risk of trace evidence. She's trying to normalize the abnormal.
And then comes the most difficult task of all. Reporting to work that morning, having to act completely normal while knowing that her employer, the Advanced Fertility Center, is about to become an active murder investigation.
And the clinic reaction is immediate and professional, which only highlights the horror for Lake. Dr. Levine announces that Keaton was found murdered by his super, and the detectives arrive almost instantly. Hall, who is described chillingly as having unkind eyes, and McCarty.
So Lake is forced to maintain the facade. She has to stick to her fabricated story. She caught a cab home right after the dinner, but Detective Hull, who sounds like a master of psychological pressure, immediately calls her bluff.
He does. Hall reveals that Dr. Solomon Steve saw her headed east on Spring Street. And this is the crucial moment where Lake realizes her cover is incredibly thin.
Spring Street is nowhere near her claimed cab route home.
And it's very, very close to 78 Crosby. She is instantly rattled. She understands she's a prime suspect because the police know she was at the dinner, they know where Keaton lived, and forensics would confirm recent sexual activity. Hall is just playing on her guilt and nervousness, letting her know they have her pegged.
So if the police scrutiny is the professional threat, the escalating, targeted harassment she experiences next is the deep personal threat. And it confirms that Jack is following through on Hotchkiss's warning to unhinge her.
It starts subtly. Lake confronts Jack about a mystery caller, an anonymous private caller, who had asked about her son, William Warren. Jack admits it was him. He claims he used 411 to get the clinic number just to find her.
Which is plausible, but the anonymity.
The anonymity suggests a need for deniability.
Exactly. After Jack comes by to retrieve some papers, Lake finds a Starbucks receipt and a clipping moved on her dresser. It's subtle, but she realizes he had been searching not just for papers, but for any sign of instability, any lapse in her routine.
This is the very definition of psychological warfare in a custody dispute.
But the escalation to her cat, Smokey, is just. It's calculated cruelty. It's designed to maximize psychological damage. Lake takes Smokey to her Catskills weekend house for a respite, and the cat returns completely mutilated.
Yeah, nearly all his fur is shaved off, except for his head, his tail, and his legs.
The vet confirms this was a calculated act, not some accident. It required sedation, and there's an injection mark on Smokey's upper back to prove it. This wasn't a random prank. This was a sophisticated, quiet violation. It forces Lake to understand that someone had access to her secluded safe space and had the ruthlessness and resources to pull off this silent attack.
And then the message is delivered. Lake later finds a tag with the single word catnip in her purse. A purse that had been out of her possession when Jack was sweeping around.
The message is crystal clear. We were in your backyard with the cat. Now we've breached your purse. We are in the most intimate spaces of your life, and we can get to you whenever we want.
This intense personal violation, it just pushes Lake right to the brink. Her city apartment, which should be her fortress, becomes a site of intense paranoia. We see this so acutely when she starts barricading her door.
That image of the shadow under the front door around 2 a.m. is so unsettling.
It is.
The doorbell rings, but when the doorman checks, no one is there. It's a classic gaslighting technique, designed to make the victim question whether the threat is real or if it's all in their head.
And her reaction barricading the door with the hall table shows she is operating on pure survival instinct. She's distrusting even the structural integrity of her own home at this point.
And this psychological strain is then compounded by the apparent kindness of Dr. Harry Klein, the clinic psychologist. Klein requests this unusual off-site meeting, claiming he sensed the murder had disturbed her and expressing concern about her divorce.
And Lake, who is now operating under the assumption that everyone is suspicious, immediately uses her custody battle as a shield. She hopes that by confessing to that crisis, she can deflect attention from the murder crisis.
But Harry's true motive becomes clear later on.
He betrays her.
Hmm.
Harry Klein reports Lake to the police, citing that she seemed upset since the murder. Whether he genuinely thought she was a danger or was just, trying to cover his own involvement, it confirms her deepest fear.
That she truly has no one at the clinic she could trust.
Right. It turns her professional life into just another hostile environment.
So Lake is now completely cornered. She's a murder suspect, she's being actively harassed by her ex-husband, and she's been betrayed by a colleague. Her only viable path to survival is to shift the narrative. She has to find a bigger institutional target to deflect the heat from herself.
And this is where the deep dive into the clinic's dark secrets really begins. She pivots from defense to offense, using her consultant access to start digging.
Her first major structural clue comes in the archives, an old file labeled Archer. Inside is a magazine article titled Brave New World, Behind the Closed Doors of Fertility Clinics.
And the moment Dr. Levin instantly and really aggressively grabs that file away from her, claiming without any explanation that it's old, irrelevant material, it just fuels Lake's suspicion. This confirms that the clinic is hiding some deep-seated irregularities related to investigative journalism.
Lake's resourcefulness here is just excellent. Instead of pursuing the file, she just Googles the source. Kit Archer, an award-winning investigative journalist.
She secures a meeting at the Waldorf Astoria's Peacock Alley, a very public yet discreet location. She knows Archer is her essential external ally, someone who operates outside the legal system and can publicize the fraud, which is the only thing that can protect Lake from the police and from the custody battle.
And meanwhile, the circumstances of Keaton's murder get partially clarified by nurse Maggie Donahue. Maggie, who is just distraught and potentially suicidal with guilt, reveals that Keaton, while he was consulting, had asked her to water his plants.
And she kept a copy of his keys in her desk drawer, unused. And she's terrified that anyone at the clinic could have taken them.
This is a massive break in the case. The murder wasn't a random break-in, it was an inside job, likely executed with a copied key.
And what's fascinating here is the prior context Maggie provides. Keaton had already changed his locks once after an intruder left a light on. This suggests Keaton was being targeted before his death, maybe because of his rumored gambling problems, or more likely, because he was already aware of the clinic's fraud and he posed a threat. The copied key just made the second fatal attempt easy.
So now Lake connects the professional risks Keaton was facing with the personal clues she saw in his loft, that scrap of paper with Melanie Turnbull on it. She tracks down a woman named Alexis Hunt, a former patient who had a very complicated history with the clinic.
And Alexis Hunt's story is the devastating proof of the clinic's whole modus operandi. Alexis had suffered through IVF, but after separating from her husband, Brian, he refused to authorize the release of their viable embryos.
So Alexis was distraught, thinking her genetic material was just trapped in legal limbo.
But the reality was far, far worse than limbo. Alexis claims the clinic, specifically Dr. Sherman, secretly gave her viable embryos to another patient, Melanie Turnbull, who subsequently had a baby.
And Lake immediately connects this to the name on Keaton's side table.
This exposure immediately clarifies the clinic's true motivation. I mean, why would they steal embryos? Alexis states it plainly. The clinic was obsessed with maintaining its high success rate.
Using Alexis's viable embryos on Melanie Turnbull guaranteed a positive outcome.
Exactly. It inflates the clinic's success statistics, which in turn allows them to charge these astronomical prices and attract a high net worth clientele.
So this is more than just standard medical malpractice. This is systematic fraud based on the theft and unauthorized distribution of human genetic material.
Right, and Alexis even points out the clinical discrepancy. Her chart showed only 2 viable embryos left, but she believed she had a good amount. The clinic was systematically misrepresenting their inventory.
So the pieces are fitting together perfectly. Keaton, who Harry Klein noted, had questioned the clinic's judgment on a patient who had undergone 8 failed IVFs. He was likely putting together the same puzzle.
He knew the clinic was stealing embryos to pad their success rates. And the name Melanie Turnbull was a direct link to one of the successful fraudulent transfers. Keaton was murdered because he represented a massive corporate risk.
Okay, so Lake understands the motive and the mechanism, but she needs tangible, irrefutable proof. Something she can hand over to Kit Archer proof the police can't just dismiss as the ravings of a murder suspect. She needs the records.
So she undertakes a massive personal risk. She sneaks into the file room. She locates Alexis Hunt's chart, Hunt, Alexis, and Brian. And what she finds is brilliant in its simplicity and just chilling in its intent.
What is it?
Handwritten letters written in pencil next to patient names. It's not just a file, it's a ledger, a secret code linking couples.
So she starts cross-referencing this. She looks at the Kastner file and sees the code, BLB. She finds the Turnbull file and sees BLG.
Let's analyze this code for a moment because this is where the technical balance of the deep dive comes in. A code like BLB or BLG is likely designed to bypass standard digital record keeping. What could BL stand for?
Batch lot, maybe. Or some clinic internal code for biological linkage.
Could be. And the small letter B or G could refer to a specific genetic characteristic, the intended recipient, or even the storage location within some offshore research facility. It's a cryptic, double-entry bookkeeping system proving the fraudulent transfer of the embryos.
It's concrete evidence of a criminal enterprise operating under the guise of medical professionalism. She doesn't have time to break the full code, but she understands what it's for.
She knows it's the clinic's secret ledger, proving the systematic theft and misrepresentation of embryo transfers. But the clock is ticking, and the clinic realizes she's getting too close.
So Hayden Culbreth, the PR consultant, delivers the final blow. Levin and Sherman are terminating her consulting arrangement immediately, claiming she was stealing information.
They knew. They knew she was onto them. So Lake is now exposed, unemployed, and holding the keys, or I guess the codes, to a major medical scandal.
And she's facing the full force of two distinct converging threats. The professional attempt to discredit and silence her by the clinic, and the personal, visceral danger of the killer who is still walking free. She has to leverage what she knows immediately.
So Lake decides her next step is to meet Melanie Turnbull, the recipient of the stolen embryos in Brooklyn's Dumbo neighborhood. Melanie, of course, is a victim herself in a way and doesn't show up, but Lake is now exposed.
As she walks back to her car, she's violently attacked. This is not a random street crime. This is calculated. She's chased by a man in a dark cap and sweatshirt, and Lake registers one specific, crucial detail, the smell of aftershave.
The scene is chaotic and terrifying. The dull roar of the Brooklyn Bridge is this counterpoint to her pounding heart. The man, faster and stronger, catches her near the East River. She fights back, swinging her purse, and in that brief moment of contact, she sees his face.
Someone she recognized but couldn't immediately place.
Right, and she takes the only desperate option available. She escapes into the East River, a sensory detail the sources really drive home, describing the water as reeking of tanker oil and raw sewage.
Ugh, she's rescued by teenagers, but she's utterly contaminated and exposed. She can't go home like this.
And the immediate need for discretion leads her to the next crushing personal revelation. Lake decides to hide in her car near her friend Molly's Chelsea apartment, waiting for a chance to clean up and regroup. And that's when she sees Jack arrive.
The phrase, cherchez la femme, look for the woman, comes to horrifying life. Lake realizes Jack and Molly are lovers.
The immediate, cruel clarity of the situation must have been staggering. Molly, Lake's confidant and friend, had been running surveillance on her this whole time. Jack's vindictive pursuit of full custody, his desire for a sleeker life, the subtle, sophisticated harassment.
The cat, the doorbell.
It all makes sense now. Molly wasn't just a friend. She was the eyes and ears of Lake's legal and romantic opposition. This realization means Lake's entire support structure was fraudulent, which explains that deep sense of isolation and her need for external professional help like Kit Archer.
And amidst this total breakdown of trust, Lake gets what seems like a genuine lifeline. Rory Deaver, the pregnant nurse, calls Lake, clearly terrified.
Rory says she overheard staff discussing Lake being fired for discovering something bad, which solidifies the clinic's complicity. They agree to meet at a piano bar.
Rory is panicked about losing her job, and she offers up her critical secret, the missing link in the clinic's logistical fraud. She saw Dr. Haas with an unfamiliar man carrying a silver container for eggs or embryos, leaving the clinic late one night.
And Rory, sick from her pregnancy, followed him 3 blocks to an organization called New Century Research.
This confirms the offshore operation. New Century Research is the unregulated storage or research facility used by the Advanced Fertility Center to traffic the stolen genetic material, keeping the most blatant criminal activity safely off the books and away from the main New York facility.
So Lake is trying to leverage this information. She's trying to convince Rory that the killer is after clinic secrets, not just Lake personally. But in her haste, Lake makes a catastrophic fatal slip. She says that Keaton's killer wouldn't have been able to get to his terrace from anywhere else.
And Rory freezes. The source says she gives Lake a frozen, knowing look. Lake tries to backtrack, saying Maggie must have mentioned the high floor, but the damage is done.
Yeah. Lake's intimate physical familiarity with Keaton's private apartment, knowing the location of the terrace, the layout, is now exposed to the one person who knows she shouldn't have been there.
Rory just dismisses it, saying she knows nothing about city apartments, but the implication hangs heavy in the air.
Despite the uneasy tension, Rory admits she retrieved the patient charts with the coded letters, the BLBBLG files, and offers them to Lake.
So Lake, still convinced Rory is just a frightened witness and believing the threat is institutional, Harry Klein, maybe, who Rory had seen near Maggie's desk drives immediately to Rory's isolated gatehouse in Bedford Hills. Her plan is to get the files and get Rory to safety.
And the setting, this remote, isolated gatehouse, should have been Lake's first clue that this was a trap. Upon arrival, Rory insists on making tea. Lake drinks some, but immediately feels weak and heavy.
This is the physiological sign that she's been drugged.
Yes. She passes out. She wakes up later in pitch-black darkness, head throbbing, with the distinct smell of mildew filling the air. She hears this low, powerful groan. As she tries to make sense of her surroundings, she realizes the groan is a motor and she's in the basement near a freezer she had seen earlier.
This is a masterclass in controlled suspense. The hum is the freezer running and she is paralyzed, her body heavy with the sedative. She lets out an anguished sob because she understands the truth. She is trapped, completely vulnerable, and the threat is immediate and physical.
And she manages to twist her head slightly just as light floods the area. Rory Deaver is descending the stairs, smiling down at Lake, confirming she drugged her tea. The immediate danger wasn't the clinic, or Jack, or some mysterious PI. It was the pregnant nurse.
And the motivation just pours out of Rory. It's rage and jealous betrayal. Rory confirms she was with Keaton the night he died, having called him earlier to tell him she was pregnant with his baby. She found out he was expecting another woman, Lake, and in a fit of passionate rage, she killed him.
She admits she used the copied key, taken from Maggie's drawer, to get into the loft, and Lake's fatal slip at the piano bar just confirmed her own guilt in Rory's eyes. Lake had been in his bed, and that sealed her fate.
And then Rory lays bare the entire campaign of terror against Lake. She confesses to shaving Smokey, to ringing the doorbell at 2 a.m. She wasn't an innocent nurse trying to help.
No, she was actively trying to flush Lake out, to prove she had something to hide. And Rory's final horrifying intent is revealed. She plans to lock Lake in the running basement freezer.
But Lake, still under the effects of the drug but leveraging pure adrenaline, fights back. She grabs a heavy-duty flashlight she'd seen nearby. The struggle is brief but desperate. Lake flees, speeding out of the long, muddy driveway, finally reaching a point of safety where she can call 911.
And the confrontation ends as abruptly as it began. Lake later gets confirmation through Kit Archer's media contacts. Rory Deaver was killed in a car accident while fleeing the scene. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt.
Rory's death, as tragic as it is Lake's salvation. It completely removes Rory's version of the events, the version that would have revealed Lake's affair with Keaton and placed Lake at the scene of the murder. Lake now has the power to control the entire narrative.
And Lake, the accidental heroine, now executes her brilliant, cold-blooded strategy, guided by a new and indispensable professional. Madeline Silver, a terrific criminal attorney hired by Archer. This is where the analysis of Lake's own ruthlessness comes into play. She survived by adopting the same level of calculated deception she was fighting against.
So, with Silver's guidance, she crafts the specific, unassailable story for a Detective Kabowski, the Bedford Hills investigator. Her story is layered. First, she confirms she went to Rory's for the patient files, which are there, confirming her claim.
Right.
Second, she claims Rory attacked her because Lake had figured out that Rory was the one who killed Keaton.
And the proof of this realization: Lake strategically uses her own slip-up, turning it on the deceased killer. She claims Rory's moment of panic at the piano bar by the terrace proved Rory had been inside and was the killer.
She adamantly denies any affair with Keaton. She claims the 2:57 a.m. phone call from Rory, the anonymous private caller about William Warren, was just a confused wrong number.
And the cat shaving.
Just a coincidence, perpetrated by teenagers. Lake compartmentalizes all the threats, blaming Jack for the snooping but attributing the overt psychological attacks to some generic, untraceable third party.
But Detective Hull, the detective with the unkind eyes from New York, isn't satisfied. He comes up to assist Kabowski and attempts one final trap to expose Lake's lies.
He reveals phone records proving Rory called Lake at 2:57 a.m., the specific time of the private caller, attempting to show Lake's duplicity and claiming she only talked to Rory once. Hull's goal is to break her alibi and prove she was involved with Keaton.
But Lake holds firm. Under the strict guidance of her criminal attorney, she maintains the cold, professional lie. It was an irrelevant wrong number. And the fact that the clinic's fraud is now becoming a public scandal, thanks to Kit Archer, further shifts the focus away from Lake and onto the corruption.
In the end, Lake survives. She escapes prosecution, she secures the incriminating patient files, and is now working alongside Kit Archer on future investigative projects. She navigated the treacherous waters of personal betrayal and systemic fraud, having defeated the killer, maintained custody, and exposed the clinic's dark secrets.
The ultimate takeaway of her survival is that Lake learned that to beat the truly ruthless actors in the world, you have to control your own narrative, absolutely.
This deep dive really forces us to separate the layers of threat, doesn't it? The immediate personal danger, the murder, the attacks, was driven by base human passion. Jealousy, rivalry, culminating in Rory Deaver. That was the visible physical threat.
Right, but Lake's ultimate victory and her safety hinged entirely on her ability to expose the deeper systemic issue,
Yeah.
the embryo theft and profit-jacking, the Advanced Fertility Center.
If she hadn't found those files, she would have just been a highly suspicious, emotionally unstable murder suspect trying to deflect blame onto a dead woman. The greater corruption became her shield.
Exactly. Her initial intense mistrust, which was instilled by Hotchkiss and justified by Jack's vindictiveness, led her to make the fatal mistake of hooking up with Keaton. But she was ultimately saved not by personal loyalty — Molly betrayed her, Harry Klein reported her — but by the professional, detached help of a journalist like Kit Archer and a ruthless criminal attorney like Madeline Silver.
It's a profound commentary on where true security lies when the personal just completely collapses.
It makes you question the nature of trust in professional environments. Lake stumbles upon the codified truth. Those letters, BLB, BLG, a secret language used to track stolen human embryos. This code was the ultimate hidden truth, intentionally buried beneath layers of medical jargon and surface-level facts.
And this raises an important question for you, the listener. Lake was an unwilling consultant who stumbled upon this crime because she was desperate for survival. We are left to wonder how many other hidden codes representing profound, concealed truths about systemic corruption or calculated fraud are operating in the systems all around us.
In our banks, in our medical facilities, in our governments, all waiting for an equally unwilling and unprepared person to stumble upon them and risk everything to expose them.
A truly chilling analysis that suggests the greatest dangers are often found in the most sterile and trusted places. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. We hope you feel thoroughly informed.